Time for another set of Marvelous Snap Over There updates. Yes, Mobius is turning back into an ongoing card that is now a 3/3. And not only do I have a lot to say about that, but Second Dinner wrote us a lengthy explanation that I want to dig into the details of fully at the end of this video about the roundabout journey we took to get here. But honestly, that's not the only change in this Over There update, nor do I think it's likely the most impactful one to the metagame. Let's go ahead and dive on into the details of all of the other things that are going on here before we talk about Mr. Mobius in full. Who's that Pokemon on the thumbnail, you ask? Why, it's none other than Marvel Snap's golden boy, Shang-Chi. I was absolutely shocked when I saw this card getting nerfed in the over-the-air update notes this week. Let's take a look here. So we're going from the on reveal being destroy all enemy cards at this location that have 9 power or more to destroy all enemy cards at this location that have 10 power or more. This honestly might be one of the biggest changes Marvel Snap has ever made in any update. While Shang-Chi varies from the most popular card in the format at times to one that's just one of many differently played tech cards, it's one that many Snap players often have to consider when not only playing the game, but also during deck building. If you're putting a card that's inside of Shang-Chi range into your deck, you generally speaking need to have a good reason for doing so, because it's the difference between your opponent having a blank in a key spot or having a card that swings the game in an incredible manner for just 4 resources. Secondary notes that they've been vetting this change for a while now, but they were waiting for the right moment to deploy it since Shang-Chi play rate had come down from the point where they had initially thought they might want it to make it. Ultimately, they've decided they have 2 good reasons for pushing Shang-Chi from destroying 9 points of power to 10 points of power. First one is that mechanically, 10 is just kind of a better big number than 9. Moving up to that double digit point is an easier to remember thing, especially for new players. 9 is single digit, thus smaller. 10 is double digits, bigger, and going to die to Shang-Chi. Second is that from a flavor perspective, Shang-Chi has 10 rings in his stories, so him blowing up things that have 10 or more power makes a lot of sense. One of the big things moving Shang-Chi up to killing 10 power things is it gives the second design team a lot more flexibility with the stat lines that 4, 5, and even 6 energy cards can have without being exposed to a tech card like this. You'd often heard players, myself included, say at times in the past, 8 power is better than 9 power because 9 power suddenly exposed you to Shang-Chi, and now that threshold is moving up a point from 9 to 10. Going hand in hand with this change, Second Dinner is also adjusting a number of other cards so they make sense with Shang-Chi's new destruction stat line, or so they have new power while still dodging Shang-Chi's new number that he cares about. The first of these is actually a card you can't put in your deck. The monster from the Monster Island will now be a 6/10 on both sides of the board instead of a 6/9, so Shang-Chi can still chop that down to size. Up next, we have She-Hulk being returned to her former glory of a 6/10, a stat line that she had been reduced from earlier this year. Second Dinner notes that it kind of just makes sense for Hulks to be big enough to get chopped down by a monster destroyer like Shang-Chi, and She-Hulk's metrics have definitely languished a little bit since she was originally nerfed, and even without this Shang-Chi change, she was probably deserving of getting at least 1 point back. Up next, we have Warpath, a base 4/5 that gets plus 4 power if any of your lanes are empty, gaining plus 1 in his ongoing effect, now gaining plus 5 if any of your locations are empty. Secondary notes that this change is primarily because Warpath and Shang-Chi have a really important dynamic for early series players where Shang-Chi players learn that they can chop down Warpaths when they're big, and Warpath players learn that they can tactically deploy a card to their empty path in some situations to dodge opposing Shang-Chi's, creating interesting inter-gameplay in those early series. Up next, we have a small buff to Jessica Jones, previously a 4/4 with the on reveal. If you don't play a card at this location next turn, get plus 4 power. Her base stat line is going up to a 4/5. Second editor notes that in the opposite of Warpath, Jessica Jones is a 4 energy card that gets big while explicitly not getting chopped down to Shang-Chi. And now that Shang-Chi is going to be chopping down 10 power things, Jones can stand to get a little bit bigger. And they're hoping that this extra point of power might let her exist in a more competitive sense in later series as well. As someone who personally plays Storm into Jessica Jones with my full card collection more than most other people, I'm hoping that that bit ends up being true. Our final card in Shang-Chi related adjustments in this OTA is Strong Guy. Previously a 4/4 with the ongoing effect, if your hand is empty, get +6 power. Strong Guy will now be a 3/3 that still has that same ongoing bonus. Seconder notes that this is a double adjustment in many ways because not only are they reducing Strong Guy's cost, but they're also moving it out of Shang-Chi range at the end of the game. Seconder notes that they like this adjustment to Strong Guy for a few reasons past just the Shang-Chi implications. The first is that there's a lot of 4 energy cards that are good in the discard shell already, which is one of the reasons that Strong Guy was likely getting crowded out in existing discard shells. The next is that Strong Guy is a discard payoff that explicitly does not want you to play Apocalypse in most situations. This potentially opens us up to new kind of discard synergy archetypes. Those that played Marvel Snap during the closed beta last summer will recall that Strong Guy at one point was a 2 energy card that was quite good inside of Sarah kind of spew your hand on the last turn strategies, and perhaps with him now going back down to 3, something like that could be worth exploring again. Finally, Seconder closes out their Shang-Chi discussion section here by noting that they're aware that the adjustment to Shang-Chi also means that a number of key other cards are suddenly ducking this powerful tech card. Black Cat, Rescue, Abomination, Living Tribunal, occasionally things like Ronin and Devil Dinosaur, or even Werewolf by Night are all cards that are going to have 9 power with some consistency, meaning that Shang-Chi is not going to be taking them out. Seconder notes that they're going to be keeping an eye on the play and win rates of these cards that Shang-Chi was previously knocking down, just to make sure in case they need to make an adjustment to any of them in the future. Before we dive into the details of talking about everything related to Mobius today, we have one other non-Shang-Chi related change in the OTA this week. Doctor Strange is going from a 3/3 with the on reveal of moving your highest power card to this location down to a 2/3 with the same text box. Seconder notes that Doctor Strange, while being an iconic Marvel character, is one that falls off pretty hard as players' collections grow, and they're making this change to see if that can move the needle on him being a playable card for later game players like myself. Overall, I think this change has potential. I think a lot of people often underestimate just how big shaving 1 energy off of something is. This is a 33% reduction in cost, and the big thing that jumps out in my mind when thinking about a change like this is, oh, if I want to use Doctor Strange on, say, the final turn of the game, the difference between a 2 energy card and a 3 energy card is I can play Doctor Strange as a 2-drop alongside a tech card like Shang-Chi or Enchantress when I couldn't do that with a 3 energy Strange. Will this be enough to make him competitively viable? I don't know, but I'm interested to find out. Before we dive into the meat of this Mobius change and all of the potatoes that Second Dinner has clearly laid out on the table for us, I want to make something abundantly clear. The type of communication we're getting in this over-the-air update from Second Dinner is very atypical in the industry. I've been playing video games for all of my life at this point, basically, and I've been making content in the space for over a decade now, and no other game studio, in my experience, communicates to the players in a public-facing manner at anywhere close to the same level that Second Dinner is giving us today, and they've given us time and time again over the course of the last year. Second Dinner opens their explanations in the over-there update by noting that they feel they've had an unusually high number of balance revisions to new cards over the course of the last couple of months. They then offer up that there were 4 primary challenges that led to this happening. They had unusually and unexpectedly shortened development cycles. They had multiple complex cards requiring additional time to test and develop. They were playtesting concurrent seasons in isolation for a little bit too long, and their internal metagame diverged what was happening in live a little bit too much. They also note that pointing these 4 things out aren't excuses for what happened. They're simply pointing out the fact that they're aware how some of the problems with these latest card releases occurred, and that they are taking steps to try and make sure that these issues don't happen again in the future. They note specifically that moving forward, some things they're going to be doing differently are starting season designs approximately 4 weeks earlier than they had been. Season pass cards in particular are going to be receiving approximately double the amount of playtesting they had before. They're going to be implementing new playtesting methodology and feedback guidance, and they've also invested in additional personnel and resources dedicated to balance work. The next thing Secondary talks about is just how far in advance their patch changes get locked in. Specifically, the patch that nerfed Mobius on 1031 had its changes locked in on October 2nd. For those of you keeping track of the dates, this means when Mobius released on 9/26, the second dinner team had approximately a week to look at data and decide if they needed to act in a way to adjust this card that had just freshly been released. Second dinner notes that their data from this first week with Mobius was really concerning. The thing that a lot of people said was happening happened. A lot of Series 2 and 3 cards that revolved around cost reduction disappeared from the metagame overnight as Mobius became this overwhelming force. Second Dinner was concerned that this wouldn't be able to naturally balance itself out, so they decided to take a strong reaction to Mobius for this patch when they had to lock in their changes on the second to make sure that those cards could remain playable. Then, Second Dinner goes on to do something that garners them a ton of respect in my book. They admitted they were wrong. They said, in hindsight, nerfing Morbius in the way that they did in the patch was the wrong call. Over the course of the metagame developing naturally after that patch had already been slated to move into production, Mobius's metrics calmed down. The metagame stabilized, and the play rates of cards that he impacted greatly improved. While Mobius was still overperforming a bit, it became clear as the patch day came upon us that an OTA, like we're seeing today, moving Mobius's original design to a 3/3, likely would have worked, but the ship had sailed at that point. The patch shipping on the 31st had been locked in at the beginning of the month, and the change was going to happen. Finally, Second Dinner closes out by providing some much needed clarity on some very muddy wording from the 1031 patch notes. Specifically, they call out that they do not launch cards with a nerf planned after a period of time passes, and they do not nerf cards based on upcoming bundle contents. Second Dinner also notes, though, that game balance isn't a precise science. In general, when they're launching new cards, they try to aim a little bit high with the intention of reining it in if it ends up being too much, rather than erring on the side of launching a card too weak and having it not make an impact on the metagame. Honestly, I don't really envy the Second Dinner game balancers in this position. If they release a card and it's too strong and they nerf it after the pack, people cry that they got scammed because their game piece is weaker than they initially invested resources on. But the inverse also has negative connotations attached to it, because if you release a card and it's too weak and then you buff it after the fact once its spotlight cache is rotated out of the shop, people complain that they missed out because they didn't want to get this game piece that was initially too weak. At the end of the day, my number one takeaway for all of you at home is Second Dinner's goal is to try and make all the game pieces that they release useful. This isn't Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone or Runeterra or other card games where there's a bunch of cards that release every set that are going to end up just being chaff and useless for the purpose of filling out random booster packs that you're opening. Second Dinner is only releasing one card per week, and they want all of these new card releases to have a home and a purpose in the game that they're releasing them into. This means if a card is overbearing when it releases, you should expect it to get reined in, but the opposite is also true. If they do end up undershooting, you should expect it to be buffed to a point where it can at least be considered playable. Finally, we get to the change at hand. Mobius is going to a 3/3 with his original ongoing text box. Your costs can't be increased, your opponent's costs can't be reduced. The first thing Second Dinner notes about this change is that this is new functionality in an over-the-air update. Previously, OTAs had only been able to adjust numbers on the cards, either their cost, their power, or numbers in the text box. And in the most recent patch, they added the technology for them to make complete changes to cards. That's right, this isn't just because they're doing a revision. They can fully change cards how they want, in theory, inside of over-there updates moving forward. That being said, Second Dinner also notes that they're going to use this new technology a little bit sparingly at first. So for the short term at least, outside of this Mobius change, you should expect all upcoming over-the-air updates to behave as the rest of them have this year, just numbers changes. As far as the impact from this change back to original form for Mobius is concerned for the metagame, I'm interested to see where 3 energy ongoing Mobius ends up at. Personally, and based on the data that Second Dinner has talked about in this over-there update changes, Mobius's play rate had already been declining when it was a 2-3, and a 3-3 costs 50% more energy, and that's a big deal. Not to mention, one of the cards that Mobius was primarily pushing out of the format, Wave, got a full redesign, so you no longer need an effect like Mobius to protect you from Wave locking you out of playing your cards on a final important turn of the game. I know it sounds cliche to say it whenever a card gets adjusted to be 3 energy, but the biggest winner from this Mobius change is definitely Silver Surfer. Not only is this a card that Silver Surfer will now be able to buff up for you, but Silver Surfer has a genuinely bad Loki matchup in my experience, which is one of the matchups still in the format that you're really going to get help from by having Mobius's effect in play. Finally, Second Dinner closes out the Mobius section by noting that they're going to continue keeping an eye on Mobius and also going to spend some internal playtesting sessions looking at other versions of his effect that accomplish the same goal. For example, something that they're considering is a 2-3 that says on turn 6, your costs can't be increased and your opponent's costs can't be reduced. So it would essentially be a one-time effect, but it'd be one that you could set up at the start of the game that would impact one of the most important turns of the game for both players. That being said, I would honestly be kind of surprised if ongoing 3-3 Mobius ends up being problematic, and I wouldn't be surprised if a year from now he's still at this same text box and stat line. As a last thing to mention in these over-the-air update notes, they call out that the OTA schedule will be adjusting slightly as we head into the holidays, specifically the OTAs that would be on November 23rd as well as January 4th in the new year will not be happening. Tentatively, they are planning to keep the over-the-air updates on December 7th as well as December 21st. They do not explicitly call out any things about their typical 4-week patch schedule, though. So in theory, we're still getting a patch on November 28th as well as December 26th, which are both Tuesdays following their 4-week cycle. That second date is also the day after Christmas, though, so I wouldn't be too surprised if that changes, but depending on what their dev cycle looks like and how far they lock those in advance, those might still just be happening. All right, at this point, I think this is my longest over-there update review ever. I'm curious to see how many people end up making it all the way to the end. That being said, I don't know how I could have made this meaningfully shorter. The Shang-Chi change is, like I said earlier, one of the biggest changes we've ever had to the game, in my opinion, and there was a lot to break down in the Mobius section, not only from how it's going to potentially impact the game, but also all the clear and phenomenal communication that Second Dinner gave that gives us insight into how this whole journey ended up taking place. As always, if you enjoyed my breakdown on this topic, be sure to snap that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I post Marvel Snap content here most days of the week. I'd love to see you back again sometime. Good luck out there and happy snapping.